Midnight patrol dead quiet. Rain slicked the alleyways, turning neon signs into watercolor smears on the permacrete. Cale moved through the shadows. A ghost in the machine city. His armor was scuffed carbon composite, matte black to drink the light. It smelled of ozone and recycled air. He carried a pulse rifle, but his hands were the real weapons. Knuckles scarred from 100 back-alley corrections. This was his beat. Sector Gamma, 9. The forgotten gut of the metropolis, where synth oil and piss formed a permanent sheen on the ground. A sound cut through the drizzle. Not the usual hum of failing generators or the scuttling of chrome roaches. A wet crack, bone on metal, followed by a hiss. Something inhuman. Cale froze. His senses, honed by years as a corporate enforcer, flared to life. He slid along the wall, rifle coming up, optic sensors painting the alley in shades of thermal green. 3 figures. Bulky, armored. Standard enforcer issue. They formed a loose triangle. At its center, a 4th figure. Smaller, leaner, bleeding. She was pinned against a rusted delivery truck. Her clothes were torn, revealing skin that shimmered faintly, like moonlight on water. Silver scales traced patterns on her temples and the backs of her forearms. Her ears were slightly pointed. Her posture was pure defiance. One of the enforcers lunged. She moved with a speed that was a blur, even to Cale's augmented eyes. Her leg snapped out, connecting with the enforcer's helmet. The crack echoed again. He went down, twitching, but she was flagging. A dark stain was spreading across her side, almost black in the thermal scan. Her movements were sharp, but they lacked follow-through. She was running on fumes. The other 2 closed in. One swung the butt of his rifle. She ducked, but too slow. It caught her on the shoulder. She staggered, a gasp of pain escaping her lips. Cale made a decision. It was not a choice born of morals. He had none left. It was instinct. The predator's assessment of a situation that had become interesting. He stepped out of the shadows. "That's enough," he said. His voice was a low gravel and used to conversation. The 2 enforcers turned. Their helmeted faces were impassive. "Walk away, civilian." One of them grunted, raising his weapon. Cale didn't walk away. He moved forward. The enforcer fired a warning shot. A bolt of plasma sizzled past Cale's head, scorching the wall behind him. Cale's rifle was already shouldered. He didn't aim for the chest plate. He aimed for the neck joint. A single, precise shot. The enforcer's head snapped back. He dropped like a bag of wet synth meat. The second one stared for a split second. A fatal hesitation. Cale closed the distance in 3 long strides. He slammed the butt of his own rifle into the man's faceplate. The transparasteel shattered. He followed through with an elbow strike to the throat. The man choked, clawing at his neck as he fell. The one on the ground, the first one she'd kicked, was stirring, trying to get up. Cale put a boot on his chest and pressed down. He brought the rifle barrel to the man's head. The alley went silent again, save for the patter of the rain. He turned his attention to the woman. She had pushed herself away from the truck. A wicked-looking blade, forged from some dark, crystalline material, was in her hand. It was pointed directly at his heart. Her eyes, they were silver, catching the neon glow. But as he watched, flecks of gold ignited within them, like embers in ash. Anger. "I didn't need your help," she hissed. Her voice was melodic, but laced with venom. Cale looked at the 3 bodies, then back at her. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shrug. "Looked like you did." He took a step closer. The tip of her blade didn't waver. "Stay back," she warned. He ignored her. He pointed with his rifle barrel to the spreading stain on her side. "You're leaking." A flicker of something, surprise, annoyance, crossed her face. "You'll be dead in an hour," he stated. It wasn't a guess. It was a diagnosis. "Your blood is oxidizing too fast." "Not human." She swayed, just for a second. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the knife. "I can take care of myself." "Sure you can," Cale said, his tone flat. "You can bleed out right here. The cleaners will sweep you up with the rest of the trash in the morning." He saw the fight in her eyes. The sheer, stubborn pride. He'd seen it before, in officers who refused to retreat, in gladiators who chose death over surrender. It was a stupid kind of courage. He moved. It was fast. She tried to bring the knife up, but he was already inside her guard. He didn't grab the weapon. He grabbed her. One arm hooked around her waist, the other seized her knife wrist. His grip was like iron. She struggled, a furious snarl ripping from her throat. She was strong, far stronger than a human her size should be. But she was injured. He was not. He twisted her wrist. The blade clattered to the wet ground. "Let go of me," she spat, her body tense and rigid against his. "No." He half lifted, half dragged her away from the scene. She fought him every step, her boots scraping against the permacrete. It was like trying to haul a wildcat. He shoved her into the deeper shadows of a service corridor, the air thick with the stench of nutrient-paced refuse. "Where are you taking me?" she demanded, her breath coming in ragged pants. "Somewhere you won't die," he said simply. He navigated the labyrinth of the Undercity with an ingrained familiarity. Through maintenance tunnels barely wide enough for one person. Down ladders slick with grime. Across catwalks that groaned under their weight. Suspended over chasms of darkness and machinery. She stopped fighting him after a while. Not out of compliance, but out of exhaustion. Her head eventually slumped against his shoulder. He could feel the heat radiating from her skin. Fever was setting in. His hab unit was a reinforced box carved out of an old transit junction. The door was a slab of salvaged warship plating, operated by a palm scanner that glowed a dull red as it verified his identity. It hissed open. He pushed her inside. The space was Spartan. A metal cot in one corner. A workbench covered in dismantled electronics and weapon parts. A single screen displaying a cycling security feed of the corridor outside. The air smelled of solvent and clean metal. He deposited her on a hard, steel table in the center of the room. She pushed herself up on her elbows immediately, her silver-gold eyes scanning the room, assessing threats. "What is this place?" "Home." He turned to a storage locker and pulled out a medkit. It was military-grade. Synth-skin applicators, plasma coagulants, sterile scalpels. He turned back to her. She watched his every move, tensed like a coiled spring. "Take it off," he said, gesturing to the torn upper part of her garment. Her eyes narrowed. "No." Cale sighed. It was a tired, impatient sound. He didn't have time for this. He picked up a pair of trauma shears from the kit. "Fine." He approached the table. She flinched back, trying to scramble away, but there was nowhere to go. He put one hand on her uninjured shoulder, holding her steady. The contact was firm, impersonal. He cut through the fabric. It fell away, exposing the wound. It was worse than he thought. A deep gash, already inflamed around the edges. It wasn't a blade wound. It was a burn. Plasma scoring. Close range. This was an execution, he murmured, more to himself than to her. He felt her go rigid under his hand. He worked quickly, clinically. He cleaned the wound with an antiseptic that made her hiss in pain and clench her jaw. He didn't offer apologies or gentle words. This was a repair job, nothing more. He picked up the debrider. "This will hurt," he said. "Everything hurts," she shot back, her voice tight. He scraped away the charred tissue. She didn't scream. She made a low, guttural sound deep in her throat, her fingers digging into the metal of the table until her knuckles were bone white. He could feel the tremors of her pain through the hand he kept pressed on her shoulder. He worked in silence, focused on the task. The smell of scorched flesh and antiseptic filled the small room. When he was done cleaning it, he took out the synth-skin applicator. He sprayed a fine mesh of regenerative cells over the raw flesh. It sealed the wound, a translucent second skin. He stepped back. Done. She was breathing heavily, sweat beading on her brow. The gold in her eyes had intensified, burning with fever and fury. She slowly, carefully sat up. She didn't bother to cover herself. The vulnerability of her nakedness was just another weapon she refused to grant him. "I'm not your prisoner," she said, her voice a low growl. "Never said you were," he replied, cleaning his tools. "Your cargo. Cargo that's a liability. I'm mitigating the liability." He tossed a gray, threadbare blanket onto the cot. "Sleep. You'll need it." She slid off the table, her movements stiff. She clutched her side but refused to show any more weakness than that. She stalked to the cot and sat, wrapping the blanket around herself. It was an act of defiance, not of comfort. Cale went to his workbench and began methodically stripping down his rifle, cleaning it, reassembling it. The familiar clicks and slides of the components were a comfort, a ritual. He could feel her eyes on him, watching, studying. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice cutting through the silence. He didn't look up from his work. "Why what? Why help me? You killed your own kind for a stranger." "They weren't my kind," he said, snapping a magazine into place. They were corporate thugs. There's a difference. That's not an answer. He finally looked at her. Her face was pale under the harsh glow of the single light strip on the ceiling. The silver scales on her temples seemed to drink the light. I don't like enforcers, he said. Bad for business. What business? Mine. It was a lie. Or part of one. He didn't have a business. He had a routine. Survival. But he wasn't going to tell her that. He wasn't going to tell her anything. A heavy thud echoed from the corridor outside. Cale was on his feet in an instant, rifle raised. The security feed on his monitor showed a squad of 6 enforcers at his door. They were better equipped. Heavy armor. Pulse carbines. One of them raised a fist and hammered on the door again. The metal boomed. He glanced at her. Her eyes were wide, the gold flaring with alarm. She was already trying to get up, looking for an escape route where there was none. Stay down, he commanded in a low voice. And stay quiet. He moved to the door, pressing a button on the internal comms panel. What do you want? His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. Sector sweep. A digitized voice came back. Open up. Standard inspection. My registration is current. Go away. That's not a request. Open the door, or we open it for you. Cale knew they could. It would take them a few minutes, maybe, to cut through the plating. Minutes he didn't have. He looked back at her. She was huddled on the cot, trying to make herself small. The defiance was gone, replaced by the raw, primal fear of the hunted. He made another decision. He hit the release switch. The heavy door hissed open a few inches, held by a thick chain. He stood in the gap, blocking the view of the interior. A senior enforcer, his helmet marked with officer stripes, stood in front. We're looking for someone, the officer said, his voice impatient. Non-human female. Silver markings on her face. High-value target. Seen anything? Cale's gaze was steady. He looked past the officer, down the empty, dripping corridor. Then he looked back. Saw some scavengers fighting over scrap an hour ago, he said, his voice a bored monotone. No one else. The lie was smooth. Effortless. Practiced. The officer stared at him, his mirrored faceplate reflecting Cale's own impassive expression. He was trying to read him. Cale gave him nothing to read. He was a blank wall. A piece of the city's concrete decay. Your ex-corp, the officer stated, noticing the faded barcode tattoo on Cale's neck. Enforcement Division. A long time ago, Cale said. Loyalty is for life, the officer pressed. So is my pension, Cale countered. I stay out of corporate business. You should stay out of mine. For a long moment, the tension was a physical thing in the air. Then the officer gave a curt nod. Fine. Secure your door. The squad moved on, their heavy boots echoing down the corridor. Cale waited until they were out of sight on the monitor before sealing the door. The heavy thud of the magnetic locks engaging seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. He turned around. She was standing now, holding the blanket around her like a shield. Her eyes were fixed on him, a mixture of disbelief and suspicion. Why? She asked again. The word was barely a whisper. They would have torn this place apart, he said, walking back to his bench. I don't like people touching my things. It was another deflection. Another half-truth. They knew what I was, she said, her voice stronger now. They were hunting me specifically. Those weren't just corporate soldiers. Cale stopped what he was doing. He looked at her. Who were they? She hesitated. The pride was back in her posture, a queen assessing a peasant. They were sent by my own blood, she said, her voice ringing with a cold fury. To erase a claim. Cale processed that. Family politics. The deadliest kind. What claim? The right to rule, she said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. He almost laughed. A queen. In his dirty little box at the bottom of the world. You're a long way from home, Your Majesty, he said, the words dripping with dry sarcasm. The gold in her eyes flared. Do not mock me, human. I'm not mocking you, he said. I'm stating a fact. You're here, and they're out there. Which means your claim isn't worth much right now. She flinched as if he'd struck her. He had. He'd hit her pride. I will reclaim my throne, she vowed, her voice low and fierce. Good for you, Cale said, turning his back on her. Do it on your own time. For now, you're a problem in my home. The next few days passed in a tense silence. He brought her nutrient paste and water. She ate it without thanks. He checked her wound. It was healing, the scent skin slowly integrating. She endured his touch with a rigid stillness. They didn't speak. They watched each other. He watched her when she slept. She curled into a tight ball on the cot, a predator feigning rest. Even in sleep, she seemed poised to strike. He noticed the way the muscles in her back were corded with strength, the subtle, almost invisible pulse of silver light under her skin. She watched him when he worked. He maintained his gear, ran diagnostics on his security systems, stripped and reassembled weapons with a fluid economy of motion. She saw the efficiency, the ingrained lethality. She saw a man who was a weapon himself. On the third day, the fever came back. He found her shivering on the cot, wrapped tightly in the blanket, her skin slick with sweat. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused. He put his hand on her forehead. She was burning up. Infection, he muttered. He went to the medkit and came back with a hypo spray, an antibiotic cocktail. She tried to push him away when he approached, a weak, reflexive gesture. Get away, she mumbled, her words slurred. Stay still, he ordered, his voice firm but quiet. He pressed the hypo spray against her neck. It hissed. She shuddered and went limp. For the next cycle, she was delirious. She spoke in a language he didn't understand, the words flowing like liquid silver. Sometimes, she would cry out, a name. Syra. In a moment of lucidity, her eyes focused on him. She wasn't looking at him, but through him. The twin sons, she whispered, a heartbreaking note of longing in her voice. I miss the warmth. He found himself sitting on a crate near the cot, just watching her. This was a mistake. He didn't do this. He didn't get involved. He didn't care. But he stayed. He changed the dressing on her wound. The skin around it was red, angry. He cleaned it again, his touch less clinical this time, almost gentle. She whimpered in her sleep. He felt a stirring of something he'd buried long ago. A protective instinct. It made him angry. It was a weakness he couldn't afford. The fever broke the next morning. He woke to find her sitting up, watching him. Her eyes were clear. The fever was gone. But something had changed. The hard, defiant shell had cracked. You watch me when you think I'm sleeping, she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement. You're a threat, he replied, his voice rough from sleep. I watch all threats in my home. She tilted her head. A small, curious gesture. Am I? She asked softly. The question hung in the air between them. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Because the truth was, she was. But not in the way she meant. She was a threat to his isolation. To the cold, empty peace he had built for himself. He stood up and went to the nutrient dispenser. Eat, he said, tossing a ration bar onto the cot. She ignored it. What is your name? She asked. He hesitated. Names were a currency he didn't trade in. They implied connection. Kale, the name felt foreign on his own tongue. I am Xylia, she said. It was the first real introduction. A truce. The tension in the room didn't disappear. It transformed. It became heavier, charged with an unspoken awareness. The small space of the hab unit seemed to shrink, pulling them closer. He was acutely aware of her. The way she moved, a fluid grace returning as her body healed. The scent of her, something alien and clean, like ozone after a storm. The way her silver eyes followed him, no longer just with suspicion, but with a deep, unnerving curiosity. One evening, he was cleaning a pistol, the parts laid out on a cloth on his workbench. She came and stood behind him. He didn't turn, but he felt her presence like a physical weight. You were a soldier, she said. Enforcer, he corrected, not looking up. For the corporations that poison this world. I was good at my job, he said. Why did you leave? He stopped. He picked up the firing pin, turning it over in his fingers. I got tired of the orders. So you chose this? She swept a hand, indicating the gray, metal box they were in. This cage. It's not a cage, he said, his voice tight. It's a fortress. There's a difference. A fortress to keep the world out, or to keep you in. He slammed the pistol's slide back into place with more force than necessary. The sound was like a gunshot in the small room. He turned to face her. She was closer than he'd realized. He could see the intricate patterns of the scales on her skin. He could see the pulse in her throat. What do you want from me, Xylia? He asked, his voice a low growl. Her silver eyes searched his face. I don't know, she admitted, and the honesty in her voice surprised him. I think I want to understand. There's nothing to understand, he said, turning away. I'm a broken tool, left to rust. I don't believe that. Her hand touched his arm. Her skin was cool. The contact sent a jolt through him, a shock to a system that had been dormant for years. He flinched, pulling his arm away as if burned. Don't, he warned, his voice harsh. She didn't retreat. She stepped closer. You think I don't see it? She whispered, her gaze intense. The way you look at me when you think I'm not aware? You're not rusting, Kale. You're smoldering. He was trapped. Her proximity, her scent, her words. It was an assault on his defenses. The walls he had so carefully constructed were crumbling. He grabbed her. His hands went to her shoulders, his grip hard. It wasn't gentle. It was a reaction, a desperate attempt to regain control of a situation that was spiraling away from him. You need to stop, he gritted out, his face inches from hers. Or what? She challenged, her chin tilted up in defiance. Her eyes were blazing now, pure molten gold. You'll throw me out? Back to the hunters. I should, but you won't. It wasn't a question. It was a fact, and they both knew it. The tension snapped. He didn't know who moved first. It didn't matter. His mouth crashed down on hers. It was not a kiss of tenderness. It was a collision, a desperate, angry claiming. It was a fight for dominance, his teeth grazing her lip, her hands coming up to fist in his shirt, pulling him closer. It was raw, primal, a release of all the unspoken tension that had been building between them for days. He pushed her back against the wall, his body pinning hers. The metal was cold against her back. He was a furnace against her front. Her lips parted, and her tongue met his. It was a challenge, a duel. She tasted of something wild and alien, intoxicating. His hands left her shoulders, one sliding down her back to press her hips against his, the other tangling in her dark hair, tilting her head to deepen the kiss. She made a sound in her throat, a low growl of surrender and demand. Her body arched against his. The blanket she had been wearing fell to the floor, forgotten. He broke the kiss, his breath coming in harsh gasps. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. This is a mistake, he rasped. I know, she breathed, her lips brushing against his as she spoke. Do it anyway. That was all the permission he needed. He lifted her, her legs wrapping around his waist as he carried her the few steps to the cot. He fell onto it with her, a tangle of limbs and desperation. Their clothes were an impediment, a frustration. They were torn away with an urgency that bordered on violence. Her skin was cool and smooth under his hands. The silver scales on her forearms were like polished stone. He ran his thumb over them, marveling at the texture. She explored his body with the same desperate curiosity. Her fingers traced the network of scars on his back, the hard planes of his chest. She was mapping his history, his damage. This wasn't about love. It wasn't even about lust. It was about something more fundamental. Two solitary creatures, two survivors, crashing into each other in the dark. It was a desperate affirmation of life in a place that was built for death. It was aggressive, a battle of wills that slowly melted into a shared, frantic rhythm. It was a claiming, a branding, each of them marking the other, irrevocably. Afterward, they lay in the darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of the security monitor. The silence was different now. It was not empty. It was filled with the sound of their breathing, the beat of their hearts. I don't do this, he said into the darkness. The admission was torn from him, a raw piece of his soul he hadn't intended to share. He felt her stir beside him. She propped herself up on an elbow, looking down at him. He could just make out the silhouette of her face. Neither do I, she replied, and her voice was stripped of all its royal authority. It was just her, Xylia. The dynamic had shifted. Permanently. They were no longer just a protector and his charge. They were something else. Something undefined and dangerous. The quiet was shattered by a deafening roar. The entire hab unit shook. A crack spiderwebbed across the far wall. Kale was on his feet before the dust had settled, grabbing his rifle. Xylia was right behind him, her alien blade, which he had returned to her, in her hand. The wall exploded inward. An armored vehicle, a corporate personnel carrier, smashed through the permacrete and steel, its front end ramming into the room. Shrapnel and debris flew everywhere. Floodlights on the vehicle snapped on, bathing the destroyed room in a harsh, white glare. They found us, Xylia stated, her voice calm, lethal. They didn't find us, Kale corrected, his eyes scanning the breach. They were led here. Enforcers began to pour out of the back of the vehicle, rifles raised. Go, Kale yelled, shoving her towards a maintenance hatch in the floor he had pried open moments before. Now, she didn't argue. She gave him one look, a look that said more than words ever could, and slipped into the darkness below. Kale laid down a spray of covering fire, forcing the enforcers to take cover. He tossed a flashbang grenade into their midst. It detonated with a blinding flash and a deafening crack. He used the precious seconds of their disorientation to drop down into the hatch, sealing it above him just as pulse rounds began to pepper the metal. His home was gone. His fortress, destroyed. All his ties to his old life severed in a single, violent moment. He landed on a narrow catwalk. Xylia was waiting for him. "This way," she said, her eyes already adjusted to the gloom. They ran. The maintenance tunnels were a maze of pipes and conduits, dripping with foul-smelling liquids. The air was thick and heavy. The only sounds were their own footsteps and the distant, muffled shouts from above. They moved with a shared purpose, a silent communication passing between them. He took the lead when it came to navigating the human-built infrastructure. She took over when it required stealth and an uncanny sense of direction in the utter blackness. They found refuge in a derelict pumping station, a vast cavern of rusting machinery and stagnant water. It was cold, damp, and for the moment, safe. Kale checked the ammo on his rifle. He was low. Xylia was tending to a fresh cut on her arm, a gift from the shrapnel. "They will not stop," she said, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "I know." He sat down on a rusted platform, the rifle across his knees. He felt a weariness that went bone deep. He had been running his whole life. From the corporate wars, from his past, from himself. He was tired of it. "You need to tell me everything," he said. "No more secrets. No more half-truths. If we're going to survive this, I need to know what we're up against." She looked at him, her silver eyes seeming to glow in the darkness. She gave a slow nod. And so she told him. Her people were the Vexian, a proud, ancient race from a binary star system. They were ruled by a matriarchy, a line of succession passed from mother to eldest daughter. She was Xylia, of the ruling house. The heir. Her younger sister, Syra, was ambitious, impatient. She saw Xylia's more traditional views as a weakness in a galaxy increasingly dominated by human corporations. Syra made a deal. She allied herself with Xenocorp, one of the most powerful and ruthless human conglomerates. In exchange for exclusive access to Vexian mining resources, Xenocorp would help her secure the throne. The first step was to eliminate Xylia. The attack that had left her wounded and stranded in the Undercity was Syra's coup, an assassination attempt disguised as a pirate raid on her ship. Xylia was the only survivor. "She wants me dead," Xylia finished, her voice cold as the void. "Not just for the throne, but because I know about her pact. It is the highest treason. She sold our people's future for a taste of power." Kale listened in silence. It was bigger than he could have imagined. Not just a family squabble. It was galactic politics, corporate espionage, treason, and he was right in the middle of it. He looked at her, at this defiant, hunted queen. He saw the weight she carried, the fate of her people resting on her shoulders. "Running is a losing game," he said finally, his voice echoing her earlier sentiment. "They'll always have more resources, more men." "Then what do we do?" she asked. "We stop running," he said, a hard glint in his eyes. "We stop reacting. We go on the offensive." A slow smile spread across her face. It was a terrifying, beautiful thing. "Where?" "Xenocorp has a regional headquarters in this city," he said, his mind already working, piecing together old intel. "A tower. It's where they'll be coordinating the hunt. It's where your sister's forces will be staged." "We attack the tower?" she asked, a note of disbelief in her voice. "The two of us. We hit them where they feel safest," Kale said. "We cut the head off the snake." It was insane. A suicide mission. But it was better than dying in a hole in the ground. It was a plan. Getting into the tower was the easy part. For Kale, he knew the security protocols, the blind spots in the surveillance grids, the shift change times. He had helped design some of them. They went in through the service levels, climbing through ventilation shafts that were choked with dust and grime. They moved like ghosts, silent and unseen. Once inside, the tension ratcheted up. Every corridor was a potential ambush. Every closed door could hide a squad of enforcers. They moved as one, back to back, a seamless unit of violence and stealth. He was the battering ram. She was the stiletto. He would breach a room, laying down suppressing fire. She would follow, a silver blur of motion, her blade disabling targets with surgical precision. They communicated with hand signals and glances. No words were needed. They understood each other on a primal, instinctive level. The alarm finally went off when they reached the executive levels. A silent tripwire. Red lights began to flash, and the calm hum of the tower was replaced by the strident blare of a klaxon. So much for stealth, Cale grunted, slamming a fresh magazine into his rifle. I prefer a direct approach, Xylia replied, a feral grin on her face. The fight was brutal. Enforcers swarmed them. They came in waves, armed with pulse rifles and shock batons. Cale and Xylia held a choke point in a narrow corridor. He used a heavy desk as cover, his rifle spitting fire. She used the walls, the ceiling, her incredible agility, turning the corridor into a three-dimensional killing field. He watched her fight. It was like watching a storm. She was all grace and lethality, her movements a deadly dance. She protected his flanks, her blade flashing, deflecting shots that would have killed him. He, in turn, covered her. His heavy, powerful shots took out the armored targets she couldn't easily penetrate, creating openings for her to exploit. They were a perfect, terrifying team. They fought their way to the penthouse suite. The doors were reinforced titanium. Stand back, Cale said, planting a shaped charge on the lock mechanism. He detonated it. The doors blew inward with a deafening boom. They stormed the room. It was an opulent space, with panoramic views of the glittering, rain-swept city. And in the center of it all, she stood. Syra. She looked almost identical to Xylia. The same silver eyes, the same proud bearing. But where Xylia's strength was a contained fire, Syra's was a cold, brittle ice. She was flanked by two massive Vexian guards in ornate, ceremonial armor. Sister, Syra said, her voice smooth and mocking. I knew you would be foolish enough to come here. You dishonor our name, Syra, Xylia snarled, her blade held ready. You consort with these parasites. I am ensuring our survival, Syra countered. You would have led us to ruin with your outdated traditions. I am building a future. You are building a cage, Xylia retorted. The sisters stared at each other, the air crackling with their hatred. Then Syra smiled. No matter. Your reign ends here. She gave a sharp nod to her guards. They charged. Cale met the first one. It was like hitting a wall. The Vexian was incredibly strong. He blocked a blow from a massive power glaive that nearly shattered his arm. Xylia engaged the other, their blades a blur of silver light as they clashed. Cale fought with a desperate, brutal efficiency. He couldn't match the guard's strength, so he used his speed and cunning. He dodged, weaved, using the environment to his advantage. He kicked a table into the guard's legs, making him stumble. He fired his rifle at point-blank range, the shot sparking uselessly against the heavy armor. While Cale and Xylia were occupied, Syra drew a weapon, a small, sleek plasma pistol, concealed in the folds of her robes. It was not a Vexian weapon. It was human tech, a coward's weapon. She aimed it at Xylia's back. Cale saw it, a flicker of movement out of the corner of his eye. There was no time to think, no time to shout a warning. He shoved his opponent away with all his might and threw himself sideways. He moved in front of Xylia just as Syra fired. The plasma bolt hit him square in the shoulder. The pain was a white-hot sun exploding inside him. His body armor smoked and melted. The impact threw him to the ground. He heard Xylia scream his name. But even as he fell, his training took over. He drew his sidearm. He saw the Vexian guard he'd been fighting, now off balance. He fired twice. The shots found the unarmored spot at the guard's throat. The Vexian collapsed. Cale lay on the floor, his vision swimming. The smell of his own burning flesh filled his nostrils. He saw Xylia turn. Her face was a mask of pure, incandescent rage. The gold in her eyes had completely consumed the silver. She was a goddess of vengeance. She moved faster than he had ever seen her move. She disarmed her own opponent with a complex move that broke his wrist, then slammed the pommel of her blade into his temple. He went down hard. Then she turned on Syra. The fight was over in seconds. Syra was a politician, not a warrior. Xylia was both. She batted the plasma pistol away, kicked her sister's legs out from under her, and pressed the tip of her blade to Syra's throat. You are not worthy of our name, Xylia hissed, her voice trembling with fury. You are not worthy of our blood. The remaining Vexian guards, seeing their leader defeated in such a dishonorable way, lowered their weapons. They bowed their heads to Xylia. Their loyalty had shifted. The battle was won. Xylia kicked her sister's pistol away and rushed to Kale's side. "Kale," she said, her voice frantic. She gently turned him over. He looked up at her. Her face was blurred. "Did we win?" he managed to ask, his voice a hoarse whisper. "We won," she said, tears tracing paths through the grime on her cheeks. He allowed himself a small, grim smile. "Good," he said. Then the world went black. Weeks later, he woke up to the gentle hum of a starship's life support. He was in a bio bed, his shoulder encased in a field of shimmering blue light. The pain was a dull, distant echo. Xylia was sitting in a chair by his bed. She looked different. She wore flowing robes of deep indigo and silver. A simple circlet of the same dark, crystalline material as her blade rested on her brow. She looked regal. She saw he was awake. A look of profound relief washed over her face. "You're awake," she whispered. "Where are we?" he asked, his voice rough. "Aboard my flagship," she said. "We are returning home." He learned what had happened after he'd passed out. Xylia had taken command. She had secured the tower, apprehended Syra, and used Xenocorp's own communication systems to broadcast her sister's treason to the Vexian matriarchy. Her claim to the throne was now undisputed. He had become a hero to her people, the human who had saved their queen. The day of her coronation was a grand affair. He stood on a balcony overlooking a vast assembly hall, filled with thousands of Vexian citizens. The broadcast was being sent to every corner of their empire. Xylia stood at the center of a raised dais, a vision of power and grace. She addressed her people, her voice ringing with authority. She spoke of her exile, of her sister's betrayal, and of a new future for their people, a future free of corrupting outside influences. Then she turned. Her silver eyes found him in the crowd. "But I did not do this alone," she declared, her voice carrying across the silent hall. She gestured for him to join her. He walked forward, his arms still in a scent sling. He felt the eyes of thousands on him. He felt out of place, a stray dog in a palace. He stopped beside her. "This human, Kale," she said, her voice softening, "stood when my own blood fell. He fought for me. He bled for me." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "He is not my subject. He is not my guard." She turned to face him fully. She took his good hand in hers. Her skin was cool, familiar. "He is my anchor," she said, her voice filled with a conviction that shook him to his core. "My shield." She raised their joined hands for all to see. "My consort." A collective gasp went through the assembly. The declaration was unprecedented. Shocking. She leaned in close, her lips brushing his ear, her words for him alone. A private echo of a past threat, now a promise. "Be good, human," she whispered. "This won't hurt." Then she pulled back, and before her entire civilization, she kissed him. It was not the desperate, angry kiss from the Hab unit. It was a kiss of certainty, of partnership, a public sealing of their bond. The assembly erupted in a deafening roar. Later, they stood on the bridge of her flagship, looking out at the starfield through a massive viewport. She was the matriarch. He was her prince consort. His old life was not just gone. It was a ghost from another existence. She sat on the command throne, a seat of immense power. He stood beside it, his rightful place. "You ready for this?" he asked, his voice a low rumble in the quiet of the bridge. She looked away from the stars and up at him. Her silver eyes held a universe of fire and love and challenges yet to come. She reached out, her fingers lacing with his. "We are." Their future was unwritten, filled with political intrigue, with rebuilding a civilization, with threats both new and old. But they would face it, together. He was no longer just a survivor. He was a protector, a partner. She was no longer just a hunted heir. She was a queen, bolstered by an unbreakable alliance. The stoic protector and the defiant royal. Their story was just beginning, and the galaxy would learn to fear their names. He looked down at their joined hands. His, scarred and human. Hers, elegant and alien. A perfect fit. A perfect team. The ship moved silently through the void, carrying them toward their new destiny. He had found a purpose beyond mere survival. He had found a home, not in a place, but in a person. And for the first time in a very long time, Kale felt something that resembled peace. It was a dangerous peace, a volatile peace, but it was his. It was theirs, and he would fight all of creation to keep it.